Kids, you can head on up to Children's Church at this time. Everyone else, why don't you flip in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 29. We're going to be in verses 1 through 30 today. We got a fairly large text. Back when I was in high school, the senior high youth group met twice a week. We would meet on Sunday night with our youth pastor, because on Wednesday night he was doing junior high. So on Sunday night, we'd meet with our youth pastor, Drew. On Wednesday nights, we would meet at Dr. Larry and Connie's house for something called The Mix. And Dr. Larry, he was a chiropractor in Sheraton. He was the chairman of our elder board. And for years, we would go out to Dr. Larry and Connie's. We'd play games. We'd eat food. He'd give us a lesson, and we loved it. And one Wednesday night, we got there, and Dr. Larry and his wife split up the guys and the girls, and we kind of knew what was going on at that point. The girls went out to the back porch to have a talk, and all the guys went with Dr. Larry down to the basement. And they had planned that they were going to give us teen students the talk that night. And I don't know how it went for the girls out on the patio. I know how it went for us in the basement, and I wouldn't ever want to relive that moment in my life with Dr. Larry down there. But he taught us some great things. You know, he explained the importance of purity and the importance of waiting for marriage. And we talked through some different Bible passages, which would have been great had he just left it there. But Dr. Larry had this old projector that he had loaded up with a bunch of pictures. And he showed all of us teenage boys what it might look like if you decide not to wait for marriage. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm saying Dr. Larry showed us graphic pictures of what it looks like to have different STDs, and then explained to us the pain and the complications that come with that. I'll never forget it. And I'm sure neither will my youth pastor, because he didn't know that was going to happen. And he had to call all of our parents and explain to them what happened. But that Dr. Larry gave us a talk and used visual aids to promote abstinence. And that really was his goal. I mean, that really was his goal. He wanted us to see the reality of what could happen if we all lived like it's Fast Times at Ridgemont High, right? It's like this, the whole smoking thing. Here's your lungs after smoking, or that 80s commercial, here's your brain, and then they crack an egg into a frying pan and say, here's your brain on drugs, right? And then they say, any questions? And it's just supposed to be, that's that, right? And the entire concept is to confront you with the potential results of your bad decisions, to give you an ugly look at where you might be going, an ugly glimpse of your impurity and your unhealthy habits, so that you might hopefully abandon that lifestyle. And there is some wisdom in that. Proverbs 19:25 says, strike a scoffer, and the simple will learn prudence. And it's a way of saying that those who witness the consequences and the discipline of another's foolishness should learn from that, so that you don't end up where they are. And I think that our text today kind of falls under that kind of context for us. It was as if God is going to look at Jacob. Remember, we're talking about Jacob the patriarch. He's going to look at him and just say, I want to show you your future self if you don't turn things around in your life. He's going to show him his future self in Laban, his uncle. And in turn, show us our future selves if we act at all like Laban and we don't turn from that Laban lifestyle. Now, we have seen some horrible things from Jacob so far in Genesis. Going back a few months ago, we saw Jacob trick his older brother into selling him his birthright. Then we saw him conspire with his mother Rebekah against his father Isaac and against his brother Esau in order for him to get the big patriarchal blessing, a blessing that Isaac intended to give to Esau. And now Esau wants to kill Jacob. So Rebekah tells Jacob, go to Haran, go to my family's country, go find them. My uncle Laban is there. Uncle Laban, it's her brother Laban, I'm sorry. Brother Laban is there. Go find him, he's going to protect you. And Isaac gets on board with that, and he says, you're going to go find a wife from Laban's house. You're going to you're going to marry one of his daughters. That's what I'm sending you there for. And so that's what happens. Last week we saw the beginning of that journey where Jacob is setting out. He's fleeing from his consequences, but he's on his way to Haran, and he stops for the night. He's laying under the cold night sky, no protection, no tent, no pillow other than the rock that he found in that place, and he falls asleep. And the Lord appears to him in a dream that night, and remember that God showed him a ladder that extends from the ground all the way up to heaven, and God was at the top of that ladder, and there were angels going up and down that ladder, and it was a point of contact between the physical and the spiritual. It represented a point of contact between God and his people. And God tells Jacob, you're getting all the covenant promises, land, seed, blessing. I'm passing all that on to you. And he says to him, I'm going to be with you wherever you go. I'm there. I'm going to be with you. And Jacob woke up and he worshiped God. And that's the first time we've seen Jacob show any interest in God whatsoever. And I think that this encounter changed the trajectory of Jacob's life, but we know that change doesn't just happen overnight. It can't just happen overnight. Remember that last fill in the blank we had last week in the sermon notes? Jacob was a piece of work, but now after this event, we see that he's going to be a work in progress for the Lord. God is going to transform this man, but that transformation, that growth for Jacob, in Jacob, is going to require loving discipline from the Father. And I'm going to contend this morning that God is going to use Laban to teach Jacob and to teach us, I hope, a valuable lesson. We're going to look through basically a graphic slideshow of Jacob's encounter with Laban, and we're going to hopefully see God's discipline at work, and we're going to hopefully take something from that with us. And here's the big idea this morning. Reproof from the Lord is for the refining of his people. Discipline and reproof take place for our benefit as God's people. It is for us. God is looking to build up his people, build a people up for himself, that he would be our God, that we would be his people, and that we would be with him forever. And given the opportunity, a necessary part of being his people is being conformed more and more to the image of his Son, Jesus Christ, living in holiness, living in righteousness. And that's the idea that God has behind refining his people more and more toward perfection. And that's what God is going to get at with Jacob over the next several chapters. And it starts in a hard way in our passage today. So we're going to cover chapter 29, verses 1 through 30, and I'm going to do it just a little bit differently. The big stuff doesn't happen until like the last 7 verses, so we're going to walk through stuff until we get there, just kind of verse by verse, understanding what's happening as we go. And these first 14 verses show us that Jacob really is meeting his match, and I mean that in a number of ways here. He's going to meet his match in a wife, and he's going to meet his match in deception with Laban. So looking at verse 1 here. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east, which is where he was getting at. And the literal translation, when it says Jacob went on his journey, remember that very verse takes place the morning after he had this dream from God, and he woke up and got on his journey, and the Hebrew would better be translated here that he lifted up his feet, and in the Hebrew that usually means he's got a little bit of a bounce in his step now, where the night before he was fleeing for his life, now he's got a little bit of a bounce in his step. Life didn't feel so heavy under the promises of the Lord that he had just encountered. And I think at the very least, Jacob made his way toward Mesopotamia in eager anticipation of what it is that God is going to do for him. So as he gets there, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it, for out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. So it's odd to me that there's so much attention given to the well and the stone that's on the well. Jacob sees this big stone. It's like a lid covering the well, and some say it's maybe to help that well from becoming polluted. Some say it's to guard the well from thieves, because it would probably take multiple people to move that stone, and that's why all the shepherds would gather together and then move the stone and then water all the sheep, and so they don't have to do it several times. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Jacob comes to the well, and I think he tries to address the shepherds that he finds there in a friendly manner, hoping that they're going to help him find his uncle Laban. Jacob said to the shepherds, "My brothers, where do you come from?" And they said, "We are from Haran." And great, awesome. That's the place that he's trying to get to. He knows he's in the right place. So he says to him, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" And they say, "We know him." Even better, they're going to be able to help Jacob find Laban and go to Laban. And then he says to him, "Is it well with him?" And they said, "It is well. And see, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep." So that is really the best news possible for Jacob at this point. Jacob is there, he in part to marry one of Laban's daughters. And Jacob finds out Laban is doing well. He's in the right place. His family's still alive. He's doing well. And one of his daughters is even making her way to him as they were speaking. And it just seems providential, doesn't it? It reminds us a little bit of when Abraham's servant went to this same place and went to a well looking for a wife for Isaac. And Rebekah shows up, and it all just seemed so, God's hand was at work in the whole thing, right? It all just lined up. Right time, right place, right daughter from the right family. It's looking like that story all over again, and we could wish that it would end up like that story too. But Jacob sees Rachel coming, and he says to the other shepherds, "Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go, pasture them." I don't really know what Jacob's doing here. I don't know what he's trying to do, whether he sees this pretty girl coming, and there's all these other guys gathered around, and I think maybe he's trying to scatter them a little bit because he wants to talk to Rachel. But whatever it is, you got to know, it never makes for very pleasant conversation with an outsider. When a stranger comes up and tells you how to do your job, right? I mean, there's nothing pleasant in the way that Jacob addresses him here. Jacob looks arrogant. He's basically saying, now's not the right time for you to be watering your flock. Don't you know that? Like, you should have done that this morning. They should be grazing right now. Get it done. Get them out there. And they respond to him, I think, kindly enough. They say, "We cannot," I suppose they just explain it, "we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep." And it seems like maybe their custom is again, for all of them to gather together with all the flocks, probably because it takes multiple men to move that stone from the well. And these guys are just sitting around waiting for Rachel to show up with her flock so that they can all just get it done all at once. And while Jacob was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And now as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. This is Jacob showing off. Just so you know. That's what this is. There's other guys around. There's a pretty girl walking up, and Jacob's peacocking. Like, he has to stand out from all these other guys. He wants Rachel to notice him. So what does he do? He single-handedly performs what so far has been assumed to be a communal task of rolling away this heavy stone from the well all by himself. And I don't know if Jacob is just built like one of the guys you see in the World's Strongest Men competition, or what it is. Maybe it's this supernatural thing. Maybe it's just Jacob's adrenaline is just pumping as he sees Rachel coming toward them. I don't really know, but he's showing off. Emery calls this, you younger people will know something about this. Emery calls this church boy riz. This is church boy riz. Guys in the church, some of you know, if you want to impress a girl, modern day, what we would be doing is see how many chairs you can move, right? Guys in the church, you want to impress a girl, start picking up chairs and moving them around, right? That's the modern day equivalent to what Jacob is doing on covering the well here. I think Jacob is looking to impress her, lifting this rock and then watering her flock. And then it says Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. Guys, you can move the chairs, but don't do that part. It's going to get weird, right? Move the chairs, don't kiss her and then cry. Like that's not going to get anybody. And before we get too creeped out about what Jacob is doing here, the fact that he kisses her and just starts crying, I think the kiss was probably somewhat of an emotional greeting. Jacob Laban and Jacob are going to greet each other the same way. And I don't have an answer for why Jacob was crying. I don't know why he wept, other than maybe it being this intense emotional reaction to God's "I'm going to be with you" promise. Because I think Jacob surely sees this, the fact that Rachel is there, Laban's daughter is there at the well to meet him, or sovereignly perhaps to meet him. I think he sees it as a sign of God's blessing, that God has prospered his steps thus far, and that he can trust in the promises of God. So he made it to his destination. He found one of Laban's daughters. That's exactly what he was looking to do. So Jacob lifts the stone. He waters her flock. He kissed her. He cried. And then he told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. And this is where the story starts to pick up and get a little bit interesting. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet them and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to the house. Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh," and he stayed with him a month. Now, again, I'm not 100% sure what it is that took place here. The text says Jacob told Laban all these things, and we don't really know what that's referring to. Did Jacob tell Laban about what happened at the well? Did he tell Laban about the dream that he had from God earlier? Did he tell Laban about his being there to take one of Laban's daughters as a wife, or did he just give him the whole story, all of it, all together? That he had to flee, that he robbed his brother of stuff, he had to flee, and God met him, and just tell him the whole story. And I would argue that maybe there's a little bit of evidence that that's probably what it was, that he told the whole story. We'll see a little bit of evidence in the text for that. But Laban's response is important. He says, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And I suspect this has a double meaning here. I think it's talking about union and likeness. And I think for sure Laban is talking about union, but I think that as we see the story, we can talk about likeness too. My bone and my flesh is like what Adam said to Eve in the Garden of Eden. When God presented Adam with his wife, and he says, "Surely this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." It's a statement of marital union. So I think that it would be appropriate for us to surmise perhaps that Jacob's conversation with Laban had to do with marrying one of Laban's daughters, and Laban's response shows the affirmative, that maybe Laban is anticipating a wedding, anticipating marriage. And who better than to have his daughter marry than one of Abraham's grandsons, Isaac's son? After all, this is the blessed family, right? Who else? Or I would say maybe this is talking about likeness. Laban could be telling us a little something about himself here. We remember the first time that we saw Laban in Genesis. It was back in chapter 24. Laban showed himself to be somewhat of a duplicitous man. Abraham's servant was supposed to find Laban's sister, Rebekah, to marry Isaac, and he does, and he pays them a whole lot of wealth as a bride price, and then Laban says, "Great, you can take her and go." And then the next day he says, "You know what? Actually, why don't you guys stay with us for a while, for who knows how long?" It was an ambiguous term in the Hebrew that says it could have been 100 years, for goodness sake. And the idea that we got from it was that Laban was looking to get paid more. He wanted more for Rebekah's hand in marriage. So we didn't get a very good first impression of Laban. He was a deceitful man, according to Genesis 24. And if you know where our story is going this morning, you know that's exactly who Laban is going to confirm himself to be, a duplicitous, deceitful man. And who has Jacob shown himself to be? Up until the point God showed up to him on the road. Why is he on the run right now? It's because he has acted in a duplicitous, deceitful way against his own family. So now maybe it's just because I want to read it this way. Maybe that's why. But I see Laban's words here. "Surely you are my bone and my flesh, as a declaration that he and Jacob aren't all that different. They're not that different. The family resemblance is in their selfish scheming. Laban is a deceptive man, and I think we're going to see that Jacob has met his match in this deceptive man. Not only has Jacob met his marital match in Rachel, but he has met his duplicitous match in Laban, and I think that Laban is looking to set a trap for him from this point. So Jacob has stayed with Laban for about a month now, and then Laban addresses him. He says to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now, Laban may seem kind and considerate here, but I think he's planning something. He's definitely scheming. He knows, I think, that Jacob wants to marry Rachel. I mean, he's been there for a month with them, and he also sees that Jacob has come empty-handed. He doesn't have any of Abraham or Isaac's inherited wealth with him. Not yet, anyway. And in that time and in that culture, you don't get a bride for nothing. You pay a dowry. That's the cultural thing. Whether it be money, jewelry, livestock, you pay a price to have a woman's hand in marriage. You pay it to her family. So we should probably be able to see where this is going. Moses says, "Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel." And then he says, Leah's eyes were weak, which is a really strange way to describe a person at all, really, but especially in the Old Testament. The Hebrew really isn't clear on what this means. Some say that it just means she had tender eyes. But I think that the context here is to contrast her with her sister Rachel. And the text says, "But Rachel was beautiful in form and in appearance." So really, I think that her being weak in her eyes was a way of saying that maybe she wasn't all that easy on the eyes, not like her sister Rachel was. And then it's clearly stated, right? Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you." He says this to Laban, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel." 7 years of free labor is ample, and Laban loves the idea. He says in verse 19, "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man." And then he says, "Stay with me." And that's a way of agreement. Laban is in agreement. Jacob and Laban agree to 7 years of labor as a bride price for Rachel. Jacob will essentially be a bondservant to Laban until that 7 years is up. And it's not actually that great of a deal for Jacob, but he's the one who offered it, and apparently he doesn't regret it, because that's what we see next, what Moses says. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel. He completed that 7 years, and it says they seemed to him but a few days because of the love that he had for her. Isn't that sweet? Like a Hallmark special. We're to see that Jacob was more than happy, more than willing to serve that 7 years in order that he may have Rachel as his wife. She is worth all the effort and all the time that he had to wait. And men, I'm gonna throw you up a softball here. Would any of you raise your hand if you would be willing to work your job 7 years for free if it meant you could spend the rest of your life with your wife? Absolutely. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. You're welcome, gentlemen. It is a nice sentiment. But we go down to verse 21. 7 years have passed, and it's time for Jacob to collect his bride. He says, "Give me my wife that I may go in to her, for my time is completed." Jacob had finished his 7 years. He has lived up to his end of the bargain. Now it's time for Laban to give his daughter over to Jacob in marriage. And so we look at verse 22. Laban is all about it. Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. And that's the custom. That was the custom of the day. In that place and in that time, the wedding celebration would start off with processions to and from the bride's house, and then there would be a reading of the marriage contract, and then there would be this huge feast with all these families. The whole community was invited. And at the end of that first day, the groom would take his bride, and they would go into his tent and consummate the marriage. And then following that, the feast continued for like 6 more days. It was a week-long celebration. That's what a wedding was back then. So they're celebrating the first night, big feast, and this is where things get really messed up. Verse 23, but in the evening, Laban took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he slept with her. And we say, hold on, that's not the agreement. That's not what was supposed to happen. Laban tricked Jacob. And how could Jacob not have known? I hear you asking the question, how could he not have known, right? How could he not have known? And there are a few things to maybe consider that were at play here. Number one, it was dark. That's something. Culturally, the woman would probably be veiled, so he didn't have a good look at her anyway. But also at these feasts, it was pretty common for there to be a lot of wine. And so I'm not so sure that Jacob wasn't a little bit inebriated at this point. The text doesn't say it, but it's yeah, maybe. So it was dark. The bride would have been customarily veiled, and there was typically wine at the feast. So that's what we have. And I think that Laban has been planning this the entire time. He's had 7 years to think through this, and this is what he ended up doing. And it's messed up. It is messed up. Basically, what we see here is that the deceiver, Jacob, remember that's what his name means in one sense. The deceiver has been deceived. He has met his match. He's been tricked. Now, the Bible regularly teaches that those who dig a pit will fall into it themselves at some point. Our sin has a way of rebounding back to us. And I think that that's what God has ordered for Jacob's life at this point. And I don't want us to feel unsympathetic for Jacob, but consider this. He is getting a taste of his own medicine here. I mean, he really is. Laban has done to Jacob similarly to what Jacob has done to Esau, his own brother. He tricked him and he robbed him, and now Jacob is finding out what it means to be a victim of something like that. And the text says, in the morning, behold, it was Leah. He was so surprised. And Jacob said to Laban, what is this that you have done to me? And that's an important question. What is this that you have done to me? That question in Genesis typically is used as a way to mark out a sin and an injustice that has been committed. It's really more than an accusation than it is a question. We saw it in the Garden of Eden when Eve sinned and God says, what is this that you have done? We saw it when God approached Cain after Cain killed Abel. What is this that you have done? We saw it with between Pharaoh and Abraham when Abraham lied about Sarah. What is this you've done? And then Abimelech and Abraham. What is this you've done? And then Abimelech and Isaac. What is this that you have done? It marks the fact that there has been an egregious sin that has taken place. And so that's the sense that we ought to get here, is that there's an egregious sin that's taken place. And Laban's answer to this is weak. He says, it is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. And I think that is telling right there. Right there. Leah is older, therefore she is to be given the honor of first. And Laban's words, I think, they sort of bear a stinging rebuke for Jacob. The younger is not to come before the firstborn, is what Laban is saying. And that's what makes me think that maybe Jacob has told Laban the whole story of his life, everything that he has done to his older brother Esau. And it's as if Laban is saying that the younger should never come before the older. That's not how things are supposed to be done, Jacob. Right? It seems like a scathing rebuke for Jacob's entire life. Jacob's life is defined by moments of overreaching to become more powerful, to become something better than his older brother. He stole the birthright from his older brother. He stole the blessing from his older brother. His life has been about usurping his older brother. One of the meanings of his name is usurper, right? So Laban is saying that's not how it works here. That's not how it's going to be done in my country. That's not how it's done in my house, Jacob. The younger will not be given the place of the firstborn. But Laban does offer him a deal still. He says, you complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years. What he's saying, he says, finish out the week-long wedding celebration with Leah. She is your wife, after all. You're going to finish this out, and then I will give you what you want. I will give you Rachel, but you're going to owe me another 7 years of service. It's a gross offer. It's a horrible offer. It's a sinful offer. And the problem is Jacob agrees. The text says Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. And so Jacob went in to Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah and served Laban for another 7 years. And that loved her more than Leah. We're going to see just how painful that is for their relationship, all of their relationships, next week as we start going into that. But this is just, we look at this and we say, this is so messed up. This is so messed up. And the Bible wants us to see this as messed up. And again, it's a little bit hard to feel all that bad for Jacob because the bottom line is Jacob got as good as he gave. Right? That's what we're seeing here. Jacob got as good as he gave. You know the old saying, you're going to reap what you sow. Right? And there's a proverb in the Bible that says if you're going to sow the wind, you're going to reap the whirlwind. If you're going to sow seeds of foolishness and seeds of deception in your life, you're going to reap a harvest of foolishness and deception. It's going to be multiplied unto you. And that's what we're seeing here. And as difficult as this may be, I think that maybe there are two lessons perhaps that we can take from this. And I think that the first is a lesson of the Father's loving discipline. When we look at this and say, what can we take from this story? Go back to that proverb, Proverbs 19 that I brought up earlier, striking a scoffer, and the rest of us are going to learn from it. I think we're seeing some scoffers here, and I think we're to learn. And I don't want to get too far off into the weeds on this one. I want to be quite careful how I communicate it, but the bottom line is that Jacob got a taste of his own medicine, and God not only allowed this to happen, but God is going to use this to grow Jacob, I think. And I don't want us to think that means every time we sin, there is going to be a sin that happens to us, something that's committed against us, or that something terrible is going to happen in our lives. God does not operate under Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That's not how God operates. But I also don't want you to think that every bad thing that happens in your life is also discipline because of your sin. That's not how sin and the Lord's discipline work. But here's what I'm going to tell you. When we make a lifestyle, when we make a habit out of a particular sin, when we have some besetting sins in our lives, sometimes God is going to place someone or something into your life that is not going to only expose that sin in you, but his goal is to correct that sin in you, correct that behavior. And yeah, sometimes it's going to be painful stuff. I mean, God is a great surgeon operating on our lives, removing the bad parts and hoping to heal us up. And his tools for surgery are many. He can even use wicked people. Don't we see that? Don't we see that in throughout the Old Testament with the Israelites especially, right? How many times were God's own people steeped in sin and idolatry, and God brought about his discipline, oftentimes through Israel's enemies, in order to bring them back to himself? And why does God do this? It's because he's a loving father. That's why he does it. He is a loving father. Proverbs 3:11 and 12 says, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof, for the Lord reproves him whom he loves as a father, the son in whom he delights." Parents in this room, when you discipline your kids, it's because you love them. And it's usually twofold, right? First, you know that it's your responsibility to correct their behavior, and we can call that corrective discipline. Second, you know that it's your responsibility to help them grow and to opt to take the right path as much as possible. I think it's Vadi Bakabi calls that formative discipline. And if we don't do that, there's a pretty decent likelihood that our kids are going to be little terrors, and they're going to grow into big terrors. They're going to grow into Labans, basically. That's what they're going to be. Yeah. And speaking in these terms, God's discipline is corrective and it's formative. God has a desire for us, and his formative and corrective discipline in our lives serves as a path to meet that desire. God's discipline is a path for holiness and maturity. That's the desire. That's his desire, and that's what God desires for Jacob's life. He wants Jacob to live a holy life, and he wants him to mature in his faith. He's a baby in his faith right now. So God has allowed the lives of Jacob and Laban to intersect. And I want you to think about this. What happens when our lives intersect with people who remind us of the worst in ourselves? what happens? Jacob is so much like Laban, of his bones and of his flesh, Laban says. A couple of thieves. His deception of Jacob runs akin to Jacob's deception of Esau and of Isaac, and perhaps it's through this very intersection that Jacob sees himself more clearly than he ever has, as though looking at Laban is like looking in a mirror. And essentially, Jacob comes face to face with the ugliness and the reality of the sins that he has committed. Maybe Jacob needed to be on the receiving end to understand what it is that he has done and to become truly remorseful and truly repentant. Alan Ross says that through the difficult people in our lives, God forces us to take a look at ourselves. It may be that some of those traits characterize us and that other people may be a part of God's means for disciplining us for the purpose of transforming us. And I think there's some truth in that. God had brought the arch-deceiver Laban into the life of the patriarch Jacob so that Jacob's sin might be displayed before his eyes and he might be cut to the heart. Laban, who we're going to see as Jacob's great antagonist throughout these years, was used as an instrument by God. Now, I remember a few years ago, I was having a conversation with Dan Winkowicz. I love talking with Dan. He's a wise, wise man. And we were talking about a person in my life that I know had made it a habit to intentionally get under my skin. And, how do I deal with this, Dan? How do I deal with this? And you know what Dan said to me? I hated his answer at first. So wise, though. He said to me, "May it be that they would be a constant pebble in your shoe, someone to remind you every other step that you're not perfect yet." And I understand what he's talking about. It profits us nothing to be too comfortable in our Christian walk. It profits us nothing to be too comfortable. We need to be challenged. We need to be disciplined. We need to grow spiritually. And challenge and discipline and rebuke, that's what's going to help us grow. God is going to use the most effective tools at his disposal to draw attention to our weak spots and to our sin spots for the purpose of our correction and our refining. He's growing us up. And believe it or not, Jacob has room to rejoice in his circumstance. I know that sounds weird, but he has room to rejoice. It may sting what he's going through, but Jacob, he's on the operating table. And there's room to rejoice. There's room for us to rejoice when we have issues in our life too. As we undergo God's discipline, we can rejoice in the fact that God is treating us as his true children. It is a sign that we are his children. That's something that we learn from the book of Hebrews. Endure suffering as discipline. God is dealing with you as sons, dealing with you as his children. Sometimes I think that we need to take a step back from our situations and just ask, what is the Lord able to teach me in this moment, in this season? When we struggle with difficult people or difficult circumstances, the best thing that we can do is ask, God, how are you going to use this to refine me? Show me what you're doing and refine me. And God, I think that's what he's working toward with Jacob, is to refine him. The second lesson I think that we can learn from this is a lesson in gaining wisdom from these stricken scoffers. I want you to consider Jacob's bad situation as somewhat analogous. That's kind of a secondary point. Laban switched out his daughters, and Jacob's wife was Leah, not Rachel. And Laban knew that Jacob certainly wasn't going to be happy about that in the morning when he woke up, right? But he basically was saying, I don't care. I'm going to have my way. I'm going to have my way. And what Laban has done is unholy. It is unrighteous. And the offer that he makes to Jacob is equally unholy. It's not an attempt to make things right with Jacob. It is an attempt to secure for his other daughter a place among this wealthy family, but also, I think, to secure for himself more free labor. And really, I'll step back a little further and wonder, what kind of an awful man does this to his daughters? Who does this to his daughters? He is setting his daughters up against each other for the rest of their lives. We're going to see just how miserable things are going to get, especially for Leah. It's heartbreaking for her. As we get into that next week, it's just heartbreaking as we move forward in the story. And it's because Laban is just so selfish. And there's a point of truth in this. You can either love yourself or you can love others, but you're not going to have it both ways. Not well, you're not. And here's a picture of a man who loves himself, and he throws everyone else under the bus so that he can have his way. And it is gross. It's gross. But I would say that Jacob is equally guilty here. Because when Laban says, complete the week with Leah, and then I will give you Rachel, what would have been the response of a righteous man? What would a godly man do after consummating his marriage with Leah? Would he take a second wife? No. Would he have convictions about right and wrong strong enough that it would make it where when all the rest of the culture says, hey, it's okay, do what you want, this is totally acceptable, would he have strong enough convictions to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Jacob doesn't have to take this deal from Laban. He doesn't have to do this. So is Jacob going to love his wife as a godly husband, or is he going to sinfully pursue the woman that he originally had his sights on? Is he going to be like Laban and say, I don't care, I'm going to have my way, I want what I want? Well, of his bone and his flesh, Jacob agrees to Laban's deal. He completes his week with Leah, and he makes a deal for Rachel. Again, another 7 years of servitude to a duplicitous master. And we're going to find by the end of Jacob and Laban's story that he's going to serve Laban for 20 years. And the only way he gets away from this horrible, terrible master, he has to flee, and God has to help him get away from him. And so again, I say this is a little bit analogous. There's a bit of a roadmap drawn out for us. The scoffers of the text are struck, and are we going to gain prudence and wisdom and understanding? We're not exactly in Jacob's shoes, but we're not on an altogether different road than Jacob is. At the root of it, we have similar questions that we often need to ask and answer of ourselves. Am I going to do the right thing, or am I going to do the wrong thing? What commitment is greater for you, to do what is right or to give in to your fleshly desires? That's the choice that faces every one of us every time we are tempted to sin. Every time we act on or give way to lust or to greed or to pride, we're saying, I want what I want, and I'm not going to do what I know is right. I want what I want. I had one of my best friends growing up. We went to high school together. I was the best man at his wedding. And a couple years after he got married, he showed up in my office. I was a youth pastor at the time. He showed up in my office, and he put his head down, and he said, I know you're going to be really disappointed with me, but I'm leaving my wife. And I was disappointed with him. And we started talking, what's going on? And I finally got it out of him. He was pursuing a relationship with another woman. He decided he didn't want to be with his wife anymore. He wanted what he wanted, and that's literally what he told me. As I kind of scolded him about his decision, those were his words. He says, I'm a selfish guy, and I'm going to do what I want to do. And the horrifying thing for me, sitting there listening to that, is he had the right estimation of his heart, but he had no brokenness over it. That was horrible to see. And I'll tell you, you reap what you sow. Jacob's fleshly choice brought him under 7 more years of servitude to a terrible, terrible master. And we need to see the picture that this draws. Here's the ugly truth about giving in to that fleshly desire. It is enslaving. It is enslaving. Jacob, he gives into his desire for Rachel and is enslaved to a terrible master. And we can draw a comparison to that and say that sin is a terrible master. Lust is a terrible master. Greed is a terrible master. Pride is a terrible master. And so I'm going to ask a question. What would it take? What would it have taken for Jacob to have made the right decision here? What does it take for us to have the conviction to make godly decisions? I'm going to say that we need to be convinced that eternal pleasures are to be found at the right hand of the Lord. That's where pleasure is. We need to be convinced that better is one day in his courts than 1,000 elsewhere. Amen. And we need to be convinced that freedom from our sin, it comes from the work of God. God helps us escape that. And we need to be convinced that God is more to be desired than the sins of our flesh. That is what we can draw from this story. As we look at this ugly story between Jacob and Laban and Leah and Rachel and how it moves forward, the wreckage that it causes, the dysfunction that it causes in this family, the hurt, the pain, it's all the result of sin. It's all the result of people who decide they're going to do what they want to do. And they don't want to be godly. They don't want to follow God. And this is, I think, where God is really going to hammer Jacob, where he's really going to get after him, and we're going to start to see things change. Jacob, number one, has been disciplined by the Lord in the form of Laban deceiving him, and Jacob has had his own sin revealed to him through Laban, and unfortunately we see him once again make a hideous decision here. We need to be convinced that God is more to be desired than the sin of our flesh. Amen? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we are grateful for another opportunity to come here before you as a family of believers and learn from your word. And Lord, sometimes it's difficult as we look at your word to know what it is that we're to draw from this. Sometimes we know that we just need to read it and know who you are and know the ugliness of sin. And sometimes we need to draw from it and say, this can apply to me too. I'm not so different. I can make bad decisions, ungodly decisions. And so, God, I just ask that you would remind us as we look at Jacob's story and we continue through his story, remind us, number one, that you do not abandon us as your people when we make stupid, ungodly decisions, but you lovingly discipline us and you seek to have us restored to you. That is the work of a loving, loving Father. And so let us be encouraged when we face your discipline in this world, that we know it is you working in our lives. You are putting us on the operating table, Lord. And help us to be reminded every time we're tempted to do something sinful, every time we're tempted to give in to our fleshly desires, whatever it is, remind us that we are to desire you far more, and that pleasure is found with you. Satisfaction is found with you, and we will not find it anywhere else. Keep these truths with us as we go through this week, Lord. Amen.